Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show. Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark, and in this episode, I'm joined by co-host Phil Lindsey. Music is one of the M's in the podcast, people. Look it up, 6M podcast. You know how we roll. You know what we do here. This is who we are. This is what we do. We talk about the stuff we love. Sometimes we talk about the things we like a great deal. But either way, we give you the skinny, the 411, the lowdown, the information. Everything you need to know. Well, everything that we think you need to know and love about the thing that we know and love. That's what you get here on the 6M. And today we're giving you a classic, one of those albums that you can put on and just let it keep repeating all day, in my opinion. The great and wonderful Abbey Road by the Beatles, the Mott Tops themselves, the Fab Four, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Ringo Starr. Abbey Road is the 11th studio album by the Beatles. It is not the final album released, but is the final album that the group recorded together. Let It Be was recorded first. For you trivia buffs out there, you know this. Let It Be released in 1970. However, this album was released in 1969. To be more specific, September 26, 1969. It was recorded between February 22nd and August 20th of 1969 at EMI and Trident in London. The album runs for a total of 47 minutes and 3 seconds. The Apple label is prominent, of course, and the producer is Sir George Martin, as always, prolific Beatles producer in the house, and 11 studio albums, if I haven't said it, and if I have, I'll say it again, 11 studio albums, which is nuts to me. There you go, kids, is your lowdown for Abbey Road. Phil, 11 albums in 6 years. Let's repeat that, Phil, for the people in the cheap seats. This is 11 albums in 6 years, Phil. I cannot wrap my head around that. I don't know the answer to this. I may not ask you point blank, but I don't know of another band with as prolific of a discography in such a short amount of time. And maybe there are. Maybe I'm overlooking, not thinking of them. But dude, tell me at first glance about Abbey Road. And I know you're a Beatles fan, much like I am, right? Where do you rank Abbey Road in terms of your personal favorite Beatles albums?
I would say it ranks pretty high. I think that it is the official swan song for the group in many ways. You can see all of the signals of the end in this album, um, just in so many ways in hindsight, especially when you go back and look at the Let It Be documentary and you look back at those sessions. It's like, yeah, this was it. This was then. Um, and in a lot of ways, it works as kind of a perfect ending for the group, even though the album came out before Let It Be, as you said. Um, I feel like it's kind of a perfect send off for them in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and the story, according to the anthology, and of course the anthology is recommending viewing kids. In case you didn't know, you have to watch the anthology. You're not doing life right if you don't, especially if you're a Beatles fan. But the story, Phil, if you remember that Paul told in the anthology was, let it be, kind of ripped them apart. They were frustrated. They were tired of each other, tired of the process, tired of being Beatles at that point in their lives. And basically, I think the story went that John contacted Paul supposedly first and said, "Hey, let's just go do a rock album. Let's do one more time. Let's do what we know we can do. Let's try to put all this other nonsense behind us. Let's just go be Beatles. Let's make this happen." And I don't know if one of them said, "Well, this is the last one," but I think they all kind of knew this was going to be it. Dude, what do you think about that idea of, hey, we kind of really screwed this up, but let's don't go out like that. Let's end this on a good note. Let's get back together for this and see where it takes us, man. It's a romantic notion, right? How much of that do you believe is real, and how much of that do you think has been sort of, glossed over through the years? What do you think?
Uh, I don't think it was romanticized because if the stories of them actually splitting up are to be true, it didn't seem like Lennon knew that Paul wanted to go off and make a solo album. It seemed like he was very much caught by surprise by that. Um, Even if he had in his mind that the group was kind of over, I think that he still wasn't quite ready to accept it yet, and I could be misreading it.
No, honestly, you and I have discussed that before here on the show that Paul really wanted to do his own thing. The writing was on the wall, man, for a long time. Did you finally commit to watching Get Back, like the entire docu series, or have you gotten around to it yet?
Yeah, I've watched it. It's great. I think that
Awesome.
the Disney version is better than the original version. I think the uh the footage that they re-added adds so much to the story.
Hmm.
The footage, I don't know how I don't know how they managed to do this. But the footage looks way better.
Oh yeah.
Uh yeah, it's very much it's much better. I just absolutely recommended watching it as a series as opposed to the movie. I feel like it works much better as a docu series.
100%. And you know they and you forgive me, I don't recall the name of the film, but it was a film. It was about the war, and they'd taken the footage and washed it and like digitally enhanced it and did something to the film to make it pop and make it look very crisp. They did the same thing here with the footage from Let It Be sessions. So, and to be fair, we never got the whole story because through the years, Paul and John had made it clear that yeah, this was a train wreck or whatever. We couldn't get along, but they also never made it sound like this was this was the death knell. We all said it was. Everyone said it. Well, this is the death knell. And when you watch the original Let It Be, it's pretty freaking dark and gloomy and depressing and sad. And you think they all just hate each other. But then you watch Get Back with the footage that they didn't bother putting in the original film, and you're like, well, that's not really what happened. Like, is Paul still overbearing? Yeah. But does he come off like a cruel dictator? To me, no. Like, eh, you know, when George left, John left, oh, how dare they? But then you see the extra footage, you're like, well, maybe it wasn't as abrupt as they led you to believe, and there was more of a conversation when they came back. I mean, yeah, I'm with
Yeah.
you. I loved. I thought Get Back was fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know what Peter Jackson did to that footage, but he worked magic with that footage. Um I also think that in some ways it doesn't make the ending as kind of dark and cold, but it does add other things to it that let you know, like, yeah, this is it, this is the end. Because
Mhm.
I mean, we got a glimpse of kind of how they treated George and some of the creative moments, but then even when George came back and you get more of the footage and you see him having a good time and coming back, you just still can see in George's face and his energy that he was kind of over it.
Mhm.
Um, and you could even see like in the difference in their relationships. Like, I don't know, Paul is there with Linda and their kid, and they just look like they're in a totally different place than Yoko and John. And Ringo is just kind of there, along for the ride. It just looks like these four guys couldn't be in any different place, drastically different places in their lives.
Yeah, and again, referencing the anthology here, kids, but George made it known that, he didn't really need to do this anymore. That he was perfectly happy working with other people, working on his own. He didn't really need this like he needed it before. And dude, not to get off on a rant here, but it is kind of a sad commentary because George was the youngest and he really looked up to John. And it was obvious that these guys were really, really tied at one time. And oh man. I'd
Yeah,
like to think that maybe there was a coming back together that we don't know about. You know what I mean? Just to think that yes, they did iron out their differences at some point.
I mean, yeah, of course, that part of it is sad that they never worked. All four of them never worked together in a real way again. Um, it's unfortunate, but I never got the feeling that George wasn't still close with John or either of those guys. I just think he had outgrown being a part of the group.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I've endorsed this here before. But there's a great book called Nowhere Man, which is about it's basically John's memoirs. It's everything that he did, and that like in his last years living in the Dakota, New York, with Yoko and with Sean. And it's a fascinating book. It's disturbing, if I'm being straight. It's disturbing in parts, but it really gives you a glimpse into how sad he was in the end because he couldn't go anywhere. Like, and there's something to be said for having more money than God, because like people assume, oh, we have more. You can do this. You can travel. He didn't care about any of that, dude. Like he had done all that, and like he couldn't even be happy with just never having to worry about money again. He was just unhappy, and like he loved Sean. He loved his wife. To be fair, he did, but like none of that was enough to really make him get out of bed anymore. He never wanted to leave the Dakota. Like he was just. I don't want to say he was a hermit, but he wasn't a happy guy, uh, which is sad, dude. Um, it's
Yeah.
funny because I go back to that story from Saturday Night Live, November 20th, 1976, I believe. Lauren Michaels offered a Beatles get together, like a reunion, offered him 3 grand. And it was just supposed to be tongue in cheek, but Paul supposedly had called John as they're watching this and said, "Hey, we should just go on down there." And who knows what's real and what's not? John's not here to tell you yes or no, but I've always
Yeah.
loved that story. And what if they just shown up and just kind of stood there on stage together? What an amazing moment that would have been.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That
yeah,
is definitely one of the things I think is the saddest, that they never did anything together again.
yeah.
Um, and that's not to say that they needed to be the Beatles again, or record an album together, but the fact that they never, toured together again, or did like a benefit concert together again with all the four of them, that's kind of sad.
And there are stories of like obscure bootlegs that exist out there of John and Paul jamming on a song together in a studio somewhere, and the recording's horrible. And then there's tall tales of such things that maybe never happened. And again, in the book Nowhere, man, Phil, if you ever get a chance to check it out, you should. It's very good. But Paul and John did have contact. They did have phone calls. Paul and his wife did come to visit John and Yoko. They did go to restaurants. It just wasn't, let's meet once a week. But Paul did start getting back in touch with him, even in the midst of the lawyers and all the nonsense of the four of them suing each other into oblivion. They still did have some contact. So it wasn't like, well, I never spoke to him until and then he was killed. It didn't really happen that way. So a lot of the stuff we don't know about or didn't find out about until much later. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I never bought into that they never spoke again, or that, after they split up, that they stayed that angry at each other until John died. I never believed that, but just the fact that they never really did anything publicly again was just kind of a bummer.
yeah. Oh God, completely. Well, kids, let's kick this album off. Abbey Road. First of all, Phil, this cover is iconic. And as with a lot of other things the Beatles did, there's legends and urban legends and myths and tall tales around the cover. The whole Paul is dead thing, and we've gotten into it here on the podcast before, right? But the way they're lined up, like George is the grave digger. I think John's the Christ figure. Ringo's the caretaker. Paul's the dead man. Paul's walking out of step with the other four, with the other three. His cigarette's in his right hand when he was left-handed. He had no socks or shoes on, which represented a dead man being buried with no socks or shoes on. Like dude, there's 1,000 of these. Um, dude, I can't imagine this album without the cover. It's as classic to this album as the Thriller cover is, in my opinion. I don't know if I can picture one without the other, dude. Just and it's a simple photograph, Phil. No digital retouching, no fancy artwork. It's just a photograph. But man, what a cover of the album this is, right?
Yeah, probably one of the most iconic album covers ever. I was gonna say one of the most iconic rock album covers, but I would say all around albums. Like, I mean, you'd be pressed to pick a more well known album cover. Something that's been, either copied many times or referenced over and over and over again. Um, yeah, it's probably one of the most popular album covers ever.
Oh,
Um,
for sure.
Again, if you want to look at the symbolism in there, and see that George was definitely done. George was the only one that did not have a suit on in the album cover. He has on jeans. He's just basically showed up like this. I'm dressed. This is what I'm doing.
No
Um,
kidding. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like his look in general, um, with his long hair and his big scruffy beard at that point, he had departed the most from basically the Beatles' signature style. I mean, they all had, but at that point, you could see that George, in a lot of ways, had become his own man, and you could see that in the album cover.
Yeah, that's true. I know you're a big George guy. I don't know if I've ever asked you this before. And you know the timeline. You're as much of a fan as I am, I think. Uh, in your opinion, what was the song that basically put everybody else on notice and said, "Oh man, this guy, I think this guy's kind of outgrown this band to a degree." Do you think can you personally name a song that you believe was the like kind of the turning point for him?
I think it's on this album. I, th- I think
Ah,
it's on this album. I think that he had two of his strongest moments as a part of this group on this album, and I think that's also why, as I said, this album feels like such a great send off for them as a band because I feel like you could tell on this album that he was peaking creatively, and I mean, uh, Paul even said to himself in in an interview that you could tell George was really peaking at this point. He was writing songs that should have been Beatles songs and giving them away. Um, and he had all of the material that ended up being his first solo album because he just had all this stuff that they just weren't letting him use, or he was afraid to play for them because he was afraid that they would tell him no.
God, can you imagine? Can you imagine? Can you imagine being that talented and being afraid that the other two guys, or the three guys, are going to say, "Nope, can't do this."
Yeah, I mean, I but that was just a relationship. They wrote all the songs. That was the understanding, and I don't know. They didn't respect him as a songwriter in the way that they should have. And I'm not gonna say that was an arrogance thing. I just think it was a. I mean, for Paul, it seemed like Paul was just kind of a control freak. um,
Yeah.
I think John just had his way of doing things, and when you're used to doing things one way, that's just how it is. And I know several people that are like that. I have a friend that produces podcasts, and he's one of those people that are like, a podcast should be an hour, shouldn't be longer than an hour. And so, I've had many conversations with him about podcasting, and I agree with a lot of his takes, but um, he very much has his way of doing things, and I'm just like, I understand, I get it.
I mean, yeah. Yeah, certain way. No, I get it. Certain way of doing things. I don't know. My theory on the length of a podcast is just be wherever the conversation takes you. I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, it's easy for me to get sidetracked, kids. In case you can't tell, I just love this band so much. They continue to be, in my opinion, the most important band of I don't know. I'll say of all time. I don't, and I love a lot of bands for being innovative and for being groundbreaking, but in my opinion, I think in terms of what they did for the entire genre of rock music can never be overstated. I don't think it can be. But um, let's talk about "Come Together." Now, Phil, one of the other stories about Abbey Road that we have to mention here as we're going is that one side is John's and one side is Paul's, and that was sort of the agreement that side A is the rock side, it's John's side. Paul's side is more the ballad slash love song slash sort of laid back in the groove, and that would be side two. So we kick off with a John track. This is "Come Together." This is, and absolutely, as a lot of songs on this album, Phil, this song's been covered. It's a classic. Um, it runs for 4 minutes, 19 seconds. Of course, Lennon and McCartney are given the songwriting credit on this, as almost everything they did together as a band, with the exception of George and Ringo's tracks. This was released as a single coupled with "Something." It reached number one in the United States and peaked at number four in the UK. Dude, this is one of the most classic rock songs ever recorded. I mean, and to be honest, I think you can put it in the top 10 in my opinion. Most classic rock songs ever recorded, dude. What do you think about "Come Together"?
Yeah, I think it's a great song. I think it's definitely one of the best Beatles songs. Um, it'd go on any list of best Beatles songs ever. Um, every time I think about Justice League, it
Yeah.
and Justice League not being a very good movie, I
Yeah.
always think about the terrible cover of Come Together that comes on in the credits, and just like that kind of just cements everything about this movie. Um, um, but yeah, Come Together is a great record. It's a great way to start the album. Again, if you want to look at the subtext of this album of them coming together for a last time to make an album. Um, I'm sure that wasn't intentional, but the subtext is there. Um, yeah, it's a great record to start the first half of this album, and I mean start the overall album with.
And this the song you're referencing for that highly forgettable Justice League film was Gary Clark Jr. that covered it. And Gary Clark Jr. is a great musician, but
Yeah, yeah,
he's
yeah, I didn't like the cover, but and I like
yeah,
Gary Clark a lot, but I
yeah, me
did
too.
not like the cover.
And he could rock it. He's rocking it, but yeah, there's something not. Yeah, I no, I agree. I don't hate it. I also don't love it. I'm kind of somewhere in between on it. But yeah, this is. I don't know, dude. For my money, this is, as we said, this is a classic. It's one of those, and supposedly the story goes is that it's in tribute to Chuck Berry. Here come old flat top. He come grooving up slowly. He got
Which,
Juju Eyeball. He won Holy Roller. It's just that the lyrics, man, like, and we get a glimpse of that and Get Back, and everybody's like spellbound at how that they would come up with the rhythm first, and they'd just repeat the same three words and then hum it for like 2 weeks until they wrote the lyrics. I'm like, this is how they did their thing, Phil. This is how they recorded for years. Like, usually they'd get the hook or the solo or the groove first, and then build a song around it. Which, I'm sure that's probably what happened here, dude. What about John's voice on this song, man? He had such a great rock voice, didn't he?
yeah, great voice for the song. Isn't it the story that he got sued over the Chuck Berry line that's in there?
I think you're right, actually.
Um, yeah, this is kind of funny. I mean, I understand it was a homage, but of course that's the record industry. As soon as somebody's estate or somebody sees something in there, uh, gotta give me my cut. Um, which is the story I just heard about the thong song the other day, which I laughed at. Um, but yeah, this is a great record, man. I think that it's one of those songs that you hear it so often that you kind of forget that yeah, this is a great record. Um, I don't know. I think that we've gotten, I don't want to say complacent with the Beatles in some ways, but I think we have because we've had their music for so long and it's used for so many things. It appears in commercials and all this other stuff, and it's just kind of like, yeah, I know that song. Of course, it's a good song.
Yeah, but you're right. There you get accustomed to it, and that makes you not appreciate it later. The other story with this song is that it was written by John to be used as a campaign song for Timothy Leary, who is running for governor of California. Timothy Leary, Phil, may have done some LSD in his time. I mean, may have done a lot of it in his time. And supposedly that it was all nonsense. Lennon said, quote, "The thing was created in the studio. It's gobbledygook. Come together as an expression that Leary come up with for his attempt at being president or whatever he wanted to be." I love that bit. And he asked me to write a campaign song. I tried and tried, but I couldn't come up with one. But I came up with this "Come Together," which would have been no good to him. You can't have a campaign song like that, right? End quote. It's awesome.
Yeah, it would have never worked as a campaign song, but that's such a John Lennon thing to do.
And see, I'd always heard the story it was about Chuck Berry, but according to this, possibly not. But I still hear the other story thrown around as well.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah, it's a classic. And Phil, I don't know if you checked out the 2019 version of this album, which has like, oh my God, it has like 60 songs or something. It's some insane number. Remastered, a lot of bonus tracks. And anytime, kids, that something like this happens, it's easy to turn your nose up at and say, oh, here we go again. But to be honest with you, that's not at all what we're talking about, because Phil, this 2019 version has been remastered. It's called the Super Deluxe Edition. It's fantastic. The sound quality when you put it in your ears like on AirPods or headphones, dude, it's primo. Have you checked it out?
I haven't.
Oh, it's really good. Just like the new release of Revolver, by the way, is excellent. Sound quality is amazing. Um, we should probably should have mentioned this off the bat, kids. We are going with the original version. No, ultra fancy special editions here for us. Just, doing the good old fashioned, good old reliable. It's a simple song. There's 4 verses. There's your chorus. You're in and out. 4 minutes, 19 seconds. You're done. So yeah, I love this song. There's nothing about this song I don't like. It's one of the songs on the record I can flat out turn up as loud as I can. Love every second of it. You can groove to this. I mean, it's really good. Song number 2, kids, is Something by Mr. Harrison. Runs 3 minutes, 2 seconds. Is this the song you're referencing, Phil, that kind of tells everybody this guy's turned the corner?
Yeah, I would submit that this is not only the best song that he wrote as a member of the Beatles, but I would submit it's the best song on the album.
Mm.
And I feel like if it's in a lot of ways his most memorable contribution to the group.
It's awesome. Something in the way she moves. I don't need to read lyrics for this. Attracts me like no other lover. Something in the way she woos me. I don't want to leave her now. You know I believe, and how. Yikes. Simple, dude. Again, it's very, very simple here, but it's like the melody is fantastic. The composition of the song is great. I mean, and plus, dude, I don't know if I don't know if George ever gets enough credit for his voice, which is, you know, this isn't Sinatra's voice. This isn't, you know, Elvis's voice. This isn't, any number of singers with an amazing bravado. This is George didn't have a Hall of Fame style voice, but dude, when used with the right music, it's great, dude. He sounds really good on this song, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think this is a great record, both with his vocals on it. He has a really good solo on it as well. Uh, yeah, I feel like it's not just that he wrote a great song, but he gave us a really memorable melody on guitar here, and I don't care how many times you've like either if you tried to learn guitar at any point in your life, you've tried to play the solo. It's because it's not a hard solo to play. It's simple enough, but it's so iconic. That's why
It
I say I
is.
feel like a lot of things about this record is it's his best contribution to the band.
It's phenomenal. It really is. He wrote it about Patty Boyd, who Phil may have slept around a little bit. I'm talking about may have just a little bit, just a little bit. Hey, who am I to judge? Uh, just a little bit. But this Patty Boyd must have been, I don't know, quite the gal,
Yeah,
because she
two
seemed to be
two
in
pretty
demand.
popular songs. Two popular songs written about her.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. 100%. Probably more than 2 if you really want to start taking a shovel to this and digging through it. Maybe more than 2 songs.
Yeah.
Possible. Um, yeah. And in case you don't know what we're talking about, kids, we're talking about, Eric Clapton, who hasn't aged well. And we don't mean physically. Yeah, not aged well at all. If you've ever heard Layla, you probably know what we're talking about here. Um, so the story was that he wrote this about her, but he later said he didn't. Quote, I didn't write about her. I just wrote it. And then somebody put together a video. And what they did was they went out and got some footage of me and Patty, Paul and Linda, Ringo and Maureen. It was at that time, and John and Yoko, and they just made up a little video to go with it. So then everybody presumed I wrote it about Patty, but actually when I wrote it, I was thinking of Ray Charles, which is, end quote, by the way, which is, I've never heard that in my life. Have you heard this is possibly about Ray Charles? That's something new to me.
I've never heard that, but I feel like the way their relationship ended, I could see George feeling like, yeah, I don't want that to be always the story of this record. Um, and then also George, George is is hilarious because he'll drop a quote like that and he'll mean it in a very tongue in cheek way, and people will take it seriously.
Mm.
And so you never know. You never know. He might have just been like, "Nah, I didn't write that about her. It was about Ray Charles," and he might have meant it in a joking way, and people just ran with it.
He was fun. George was much funnier than he gets credit for, but his humor was very deadpan. So you kind of had to pay attention. I remember that one bit when they're talking about Shea Stadium. It was years later, and all three guys had a different recollection of how many people were actually at Shea Stadium. I think Paul said 50, Ringo said 40, whatever it was, and then George very very point blank said, "Told me it was 70," and then he just starts chuckling, and you can hear the cameraman laughing in the background. It's so funny, man. Oh, it's good stuff. Yeah, I think I agree with you that this is I will argue that While My Guitar Gently Weeps, in my opinion, was the moment where it's like, if that wasn't the turning point, it was pretty close. Like, and
Yeah, yeah. Of course, that's another big one, but I feel like this was the song that really cemented that he could go and do whatever he wanted. He didn't need to be a part of this group anymore.
yeah, yeah, and he proved that he had an amazing solo career. I mean, we have to give him props on that for sure. Track number 3, Maxwell's Silver Hammer. And it's hard to say that without saying, came down upon his head, right? Um, this is the Lennon McCartney track, of course, 3 minutes, 27 seconds, identical to number 4 in the runtime, by the way. When's that going to happen again? Um, Maxwell's Silver Hammer could just as easily be laughed off as something goofball, as a silly little throwaway song. But dude, there's something very catchy about this, and once you get, the sound in your head, it's hard to get it out. What do you think about Maxwell's Silver Hammer?
I am very surprised that this song made the first half of the album because
Hmm,
it was the John half of the album.
yeah.
And John made it very clear he did not like this song. Um, um, so I'm very surprised it made the first half. This is also the song from the Let It Be sessions that uh, kind of ticked George off and made him leave, if I remember correctly.
Hmm,
Because he just got so annoyed with him. This is where the famous quote of "I'll play it however you want me to play it. Just tell me how you want me to play it" comes from.
yeah.
Um, and yeah, so it's very interesting that this song not only made the album, but it made the John half of the album. Um, I'm not the biggest fan of this song. It's it's the Paul style of music that I wasn't the biggest fan of. Um, I think it's hilarious that more than one of them called this granny music.
Mm.
Um, but it basically is. It's very uh old timey like vintage music, and I mean if that's what you're into, I'm not knocking anybody's taste. It's not really my preferred sound. Um, I do think it fits the album.
Yeah.
Um, and again, I feel like it fits the album not just because of the tone of the record, but also the subtext of the album of the swan song of, "Hey, this is this perfectionist McCartney pet project that he just insisted that we all get on and do together. So let's come together and make this right for him for the last album." And hey, it worked, but I don't know at what cost.
Yeah, no kidding. No kidding. Um, I like this song. It's not my favorite Paul song, but I guess I just heard it for so many years that um but yeah, I don't I actually like this song quite a bit.
Yeah, I mean, for better or worse, it is probably one of the more famous songs from this album. If you are a Beatles fan and you have done all the research and you've seen the film and everything else, it's definitely a famous record.
And you know, a lot of people have tried to connect this song back to the stuff that Paul liked when he was growing up. I mean, he wrote "When I'm 64." Like, I don't know how old he was. He might have been like 13 or so. He was like very young when he wrote that song. It'd been around for years. "Your Mother Should Know," which is kind of an old fashioned, sort of old timey sound. "Honey
Yeah,
Pie," which we've covered on the White Album, which I'm not a fan of that song, dude.
yeah.
So
He definitely liked this kind of music, and that's why I was saying, it's not my favorite stuff that he likes to do, but I understand that it is very much in his bag. Uh, and he's done other things that are kind of in that style that I enjoy, but this is just kind of not one of them. Because there are other songs on a White Album with that sound to it that don't bother me as much as this one. And not to say this song bothers me, it's just not my favorite song on the album.
yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, same. Um, yeah, so the song, of course, did, as you said, became infamous, not famous, infamous later years after other Beatles spoke out about the song's stressful and lengthy recording process, with John declaring, "Yes, I hate it," and Ringo calling it the worst session ever. This is the worst session ever. Kids expect a lot more terrible Beatle impressions as this show continues. Fair warning. But yeah, dude, it's we had to point out the Moog synthesizer that was used in this, and the anvil, which if I'm not mistaken, Mal did that in the studio during the Let It Be sessions, didn't he? Didn't he bring in a hammer
Yeah,
and an anvil?
yep, that's all in Get Back. It's all in the
Yeah.
footage from Get Back.
Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, and again, kids, it's one of those things. If you're a Beatles fan, it's probably got a soft spot for you, to be honest with you, especially if you've been a Beatles fan forever. But no, for a lot of people out there, it's not their favorite song. But is it a classic? Well, I'll leave that up for you to decide. Let's talk about a song that, in my opinion, is a classic, and it is a little bit. Again, it's another old-fashioned tune, Phil. "Oh Darling," which again runs for 3 minutes 27 seconds, identical to "Silver Hammer." And dude, this is as old-fashioned as it gets, but there is something about this song. It's the guitar, it's the sound of the guitar in the background that kind of sounds it kind of sounds a little twisted, a little dark. And maybe I'm the only one that it hits it like that, but it kind of sounds like that this guy's in love with somebody, but it from the tone, the sound, the music, kind of sounds like he's a little bit too fascinated with this person. Maybe he's a stalker. I don't know. Maybe I'm the only one that hits like that. What do you think about "Oh Darling"?
I like it. It's kind of it has like a doo wop sound, but the guitar in it makes it sound like a blues record. And even the way that Paul sings it, it sounds like blues because
Hmm.
when he does like that like wailing low register voice that he does, I don't know, it just always kind of sounds like a blues. He always sounds like a blues singer to me.
Hmm.
And so even I get that the doo wop sound that he's trying to go for here, it sounds like a blues record. It sounds like this really like kind of weird mesh between doo wop and like rock blues.
That's a good call. Good ear as well. Um, because this song, as the story goes, Paul was coming in early in the studio to record his vocals for this song. And actually, all right. Let me rewind. So he came in the studios very early. That's it, very early every day for a week to sing it by himself. Because at first his voice was too clear. He wanted to sound as though he had been performing it on stage all week, which makes sense because it comes across that way.
Yeah,
Yeah, really good stuff. And did you know that Alan Parsons was a sound engineer on this album?
I didn't.
Man, if there's a better band name than the Alan Parsons Project, I've never heard it. There's
Yeah,
something about that name I've always loved, the Alan Parsons Project. Sounds like a
yeah,
science experiment.
it does. It doesn't sound like a rock band name. It just sounds like what? Like it sounds like a off-brand television show or something.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, of course, Alan Parsons Project is famous in the city of Chicago because of Sirius and the ties to Chicago Bulls.
Very true. Very true. Yeah, very true. Excellent callback. Uh, what's funny is in 1980, John said about the song, quote, "Oh, Darling was a great one of Paul's that he didn't sing too well. I always thought I could have done it better. It was more my style than his. He wrote it. So what the H? He's going to sing it. That song is in the key of A major, end quote. Dude, imagining John Lennon singing this song just made me instantly happy and regret that it never happened. He would have killed this song. I'm not disagreeing with him at all on that.
Yeah. Um, yeah, but again, it's just all the subtext there of that they just were not getting along and they weren't agreeing creatively anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't know. I think that John might have sounded better, but I understand why Paul felt like he fit better here as well. I feel like his voice and the register he was going for on here kind of fits the record, fits the tone of it. Um, but again, Lennon was probably there fuming in the sessions, like, why is he?
What are we doing here? What is this? Yeah, no, I get that. Um, so, and by the way, as we wrap this song up, I whenever there's great stories about vocal performances on the Beatles albums, I just love those little tidbits of information. Like, for Twist and Shout, the story about their first album is that they recorded the songs in order and saved Twist and Shout to the last because John tore his voice to shreds singing that song because of the way he sung it. And that's how they wanted it to sound. They wanted it to sound like a screaming rock and roll record, which it totally does. So they had to save it to the last because if they'd done it sooner, he wouldn't have been able to finish the album with them, which is, again, another great tidbit.
Yeah.
Number 5. And I'm going to tell you something, kids. You're either back and forth on this. You either love it or you don't. I don't know if I'm okay with this. I've heard both, dude. Octopus's Garden by Mr. Richard Starkey, also known as Ringo Starr. 2 minutes and 51 seconds is all you got for this. It is one of the shortest songs on the album. I'm going to go on record, Phil, before you answer. I like Octopus's Garden. I think it catches too much crap. No sense in it. I don't know why people throw so much hate at Ringo. Ringo was a great rock drummer. I don't care what anybody says. Makes no difference to me. And the great bit is that other drummers during Ringo's time and since Ringo's time will point to Ringo and say the guy was so much better than he'll ever get credit for. What do you think about Octopus's Garden?
Ringo gets a bad rep because Ringo was the most subdued of the four of them, and you can make an argument that he was the least talented of the four of them.
Mm.
That's not to say that he wasn't talented, but you're among three other guys that are known for other bigger projects and bigger things than you are. So you kind of look like lesser than. And of course, he's not a boasting guy. He's not a he's the I don't want to say he's the quiet member. He's not a quiet member, but he's the most subdued out of the four of them. Um, and so yeah, I think he gets a bad rep. I think that Octopus Garden is easily his most famous contribution to the band, for better or worse. um, it depends on what you think of the record. Uh, it's definitely a divisive record.
Yeah.
um, I can't say that it's really my cup of tea. It kind of sounds like saloon music to me. Um,
Yeah.
like even when it starts, it just sounds like I swear, it just sounds like saloon music. It sounds like if you're watching like a western, like you could picture like the band in the saloon playing it.
I'm imagining an Irish pub, like a sing along song
Yeah.
for
Um,
some reason. I don't know why.
yeah, and I mean, look, it's not a bad song. I think that it's catchy and all of the other stuff. It's just not really my style of music, not my preference. Um, but I I don't think it's a bad record. I think that it's just forever attached to Ringo and Ringo's placement in the band and what some people thought of Ringo.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. You're right. It has a very definitive sound. This was written by Ringo. He gets full credit writing on this, although we don't really know how much of this was John and Paul helped on. But I really like this song a lot. I've never not liked this song, and supposedly this song, um, the idea from it came when Ringo was on a boat along with Peter Sellers, the great Peter Sellers. Let's make that clear. In 1968, he ordered fish and chips for lunch, but instead of fish, he got squid. It was the first time he'd eaten squid, and he said it was okay, a bit rubbery, tasted like chicken. The boat's captain then told Starr about how octopuses travel along the seabed, picking up stones and shiny objects with which to build gardens. And there you go. There is your song, basically in a nutshell. Um,
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it comes from out of nowhere, and you don't expect it to be anything. But Ringo sang where he was comfortable singing. Ringo was never, much like Hendrix, by the way, everybody, in case you're curious. Hendrix was never happy with the sound of his own voice. Neither was Ringo. In fact, Ringo didn't care to sing much at all. So whenever they wrote a song for him, they meaning Paul and John, they wrote it to suit his tone. So because he's not hitting high notes, so he had to hit that high note. And a little help from my friends, it was murder for him to hit that supposedly because he couldn't get his voice that high, but he hit it. But yeah, I agree with you. I think this is one of his best, contributions that he wrote. But I would submit that the best vocal performance he contributed to the band was Yellow Submarine. Now, he didn't write Yellow Submarine, right? But I think it's his best, maybe, contribution.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a drummer, you could go back and forth on some of his contributions.
Hmm.
I am a big fan of just what he brought on Rain and what he brought on Paperback Writer.
Oh yeah.
Um, but I just mean in the sense that this is probably his most well known contribution to the
Hmm.
band,
Yeah.
and I think that's for better or worse depending on what you think of the record. Um, but it's Ringo. I think Ringo is so comfortable in who he was. I don't think that he cared. And I mean, you could also say that if you want to go into the subtext of this and how kind of quirky and accessible this record was, it kind of laid the groundwork for who he would be later when he started doing the children's stuff with Thomas the Tank Engine.
Well done. Yeah. Shining Time Station.
Yeah,
That just jumped into my head. Yeah. Because it was the same role that George Carlin took later, I think.
yeah.
Yeah. George Carlin on a kid's show. Kids, who would have ever thought that? Yikes. Um, Moving on here, kids, to the next track. From Octopus's Garden, we go to the last track on side one. I Want You, She's So Heavy. This is John back on lead vocals. This song, it's a whopper, 7 minutes and 47 seconds. It's the longest track on the album. And again, it's track 6 of side A of the first side of the album. And yes, it's John's tune. Songwriting credit to Lennon McCartney. I got a hot take for you. I am not insanely crazy about this song. I don't have to skip it, and it's not that I do, but I've been known to skip it. It's not a deal breaker for me to listen to it. I don't hate it, but I've never been a huge fan of this song. It's one of the last songs Beatles ever recorded. Uh, yeah, so it's primarily written by John Lennon. The piece took 8 months to record, supposedly mix and master, despite being the first song initiated for what would be their final album. Is one of the last to be completed on August 20th, 1969, the last time all four Beatles would be in the same room together. So it's historic. Um, yeah, one of the reviewers at the time wrote, he seems to have lost his talent for lyrics. It's so simple and boring. I'm not going to go that far. I think that's doing a bit much. I mean, the instrumentation, Phil, which we've not bothered talking about yet on this album, these guys are second to none with their composition and with knowing how to put a song together. And they know how to write a hit. They really do know how to write a hit, obviously.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to take that away from them. But what's your take on I Want You, She's So Heavy?
Um, I think that it is. I think that you miss if you listen to it on streaming platforms or as a CD. Uh, that this is the end of the first half of the album. It's the end of the first side of the disc, and in that way, it works perfectly as like this kind of I don't know, like this bookmark at the end
Mm.
of John's half of the album. Um, but the other part of it is, and again, we want to get into the subtext of this album. I don't mean to keep banging this drum, but when I realized that the first half was John's half and the second half was Paul's half, um, it kind of goes into whether you want to see it that way or not about the end of the band, because the first half of the album is kind of a mess. I think
Mm.
that it works. I'm not saying that composition wise it doesn't work, but there's so many different ideas on the first half that don't really mesh together. You've got Ringo's song in there. You got uh, you got Paul's pet project that everybody hated recording, and then you have this amazing George record in there, and then you've got everything basically that you could tell John wanted on the album, and nobody really wanted to fight him on. And this song very much feels like that, and not in a bad way. I feel like this was definitely a John record that he wanted on the album, and everybody made it happen.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think it's a good song. I think it's a little long. I think that you could have cut some of the end of it off, but it kind of teeters off into what feels like a jam session. But again, that's why I say the first half of this album kind of feels like a mess.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I don't hate this song. I don't really have a whole lot against this song, but I have been known to skip it a time or two. Um, I do think we have to mention Paul's bass on here. I mean, his work on the bass on this is, you know,
Yeah,
very good. I mean, dude, the guy's an excellent bass. I don't think Paul gets enough credit as a bass player, does he?
yeah. I mean, again, if I have to go back to Paperback Writer, Space on
Mm,
Paperback Writer is
yeah.
fantastic. Um, and I mean, I agree. I think the instrumentation on this song is very good. I think that for everything that I'm saying about the first half of the album, I think that this song is the composition and um, the actual instrumentation on it is really good. I just feel like it stands out on the album because it's the longest on the album, and again, it's just kind of like this awkward ending to John's side of the album. But again,
Yeah.
you don't really get that if you listen to it as a CD or you stream it. You don't really quite understand that. And so when you just listen to it as an entire 17 song album or however many songs are on the album, uh, you just get this random almost 8-minute song in the middle of the album. And it's just kind of like, okay. And on top of that, it came right after Octopus Garden. So it's like, all right.
There are moments of this album that have White Album kind of feel, right? I swear, this could have been White Album Part Two, in my opinion, because
Yeah,
a lot of the tracks have that feel.
it has the same odd sequencing issues here. And that's not to say that um it's a poorly made album, but it does in moments feel like there was no real creative direction. It
Mm-hmm.
was just like, all right, this should make the album, this should make the album. We'll figure out a way to make it work.
Mm-hmm. That's
Now, I
fair. I
don't
mean,
think that that's the problem on the second half of the album, but again, I feel like that's kind of the subtext here is that I think John went into this wanting to do an album. And if you can say that George was very much peaking creatively and he was kind of ready to do his own thing, um, yeah, because I think the story around something is he actually was ready to give that song away. Can you imagine if he gave that song away?
wow.
Um, I can't remember the artist he wrote it for, but he was ready to give that song away. Um, and so, yeah, when you just think about all of this stuff in the first half of the album and how you can just see the lack of creative direction with everybody else, and then the quote unquote Paul side, you can see where Paul had all his ideas and he had a scope to what he wanted to do with the second half of the album. And it feels it feels more concise in a lot of ways. It still kind of has those weird sequencing issues as well, but you could see an overarching creative idea to it. And I think that's in those moments you can see, yeah, he's ready. He's ready to go off and have full control of a project.
Yeah, I agree. Um, and I think who you're thinking of, he first offered the song to Joe Cocker.
Crazy. Imagine if this did not make this album and that was a Joe Cocker record.
Whew.
Crazy. I mean,
Hey,
Joe Cocker
listen,
has given us one of the greatest Beatles covers ever.
absolutely.
But still, like, no, this is that that's George's record.
And Joe Cocker, tease the guy if you want to, kids. I get it, and you could see why you could tease him. It'd be fun to make fun of him. This guy did the work. He wasn't produced. He wasn't slick. He wasn't, the record company didn't put him out there with great packaging. He was just raw himself, could sing, and had that great grit to his voice. And dude, Cocker he was a good sport. Belushi got on stage and mocked him in the song with him. And Joe Cocker didn't give him grief about it. He was a fan of John Belushi's. The guy could have been a jerk about everything. He chose not to be. I mean, yeah. Not to praise Joe Cocker too much here, Phil, but that's another guy that catches too much crap, in my opinion.
He kind of
But
does. I think that again, he gave us one of the greatest Beatle cover ever,
yeah.
and I think that his Woodstock performance is legendary. Yeah, can't dump on the guy too much just because he became the butt of some jokes.
Yeah, I feel like, again, you make great points, and I feel like he is vastly underrated. Well, kids, there is side one. And it's funny that we're going back to George again, because we got to start talking about side two, and we're kicking off side two with another great George song, another freaking classic at 3 minutes and 5 seconds. Here Comes the Sun. One of the most, and like the Beatles didn't write like 30 songs that are well known. Of course they did. But this is one of them, in my opinion. Here Comes the Sun, excuse me, is a great song. The instrumentation is fantastic. The acoustic guitar is beautiful. I mean, dude, we could spend an hour just talking about this song. As a George guy, what do you think about Here Comes the Sun?
Um, yeah, yeah. If you come out of this record seeing anything, it's that George had arrived. George was ready to go off and do whatever he wanted. I think that these two songs on this record, potentially the two best records on the album, honestly, like, and that's not to down anything else on the album, but I just feel like there's such a vast difference in his songs on this album compared to anything John was doing, anything that Paul was contributing. Um, I mean, just tonally, just the sound was so different. Um, but I feel like Here Comes the Sun fit right in Paul's pocket as well because Paul wanted to do the stuff with the, you know, huge scope to it and like just I don't want to say overproduced, but like I don't know, grand, instrumentation and orchestral arrangement to it. And so it fit right in the pocket of what Paul wanted to do. And so that's part of why it fits so well on the second half of this album. And it fits the sound that you could tell that Paul was going into this record wanting to do. Um, it's one of I feel like it's one of the best Beatles records ever as well. I feel like it's one of those that belong on the list of top Beatles records.
Couldn't agree more. And this song has the Moog synthesizer back on it, which I just like saying, Moog synthesizer. Um, Classic instrument for a classic band. Yeah, you're right, dude. This is one of their top songs of all time. It gave George, let's see, the level of recognition as a songwriter previously reserved for his bandmates, which I would completely agree with that. I mean, again, it's a great example of a guy who had come a long way. And look, not to discount his ability earlier, but this guy, as a kid, learned at the feet of the masters, in my opinion. Yes, the relationships got soured as time went on, but dude, you just imagine George quietly listening and developing over time and not necessarily catching up to them, but understanding how he fit and understanding what he could do with the things that because he got so much better. You listen to that first Beatles album compared to the last one, and you can see, well, they all have matured, obviously, but John and Paul were years older than what their age suggested. I think we can agree. And George definitely got there. Do you think that he was? I mean, I think we can say he got on par with them toward the end. Do you think he surpassed them in any way that really counts, or is that really too hard to measure?
I don't want to say he surpassed them because I think they worked so long together as a songwriting duo. I just think that his sound and what he wanted to do evolved past what Lennon and McCartney were doing as a duo.
Mm.
And that's not to say he surpassed them. I just think that he came with something that was fresh and new, and it didn't really always fit their direction, but it was definitely a sound that needed to be out there. By judging by his first solo album, there was so much music that he wanted to make that was just so new and different than what the Beatles were producing. And I think that, being a part of the band kind of hindered him creatively. It stifled him.
He said in his autobiography, I Me Mine, quote, Here Comes the Sun was written at the time when Apple was getting like school, where we had to go and be businessmen, sign this and sign that. It seems as if winter in England goes on forever. By the time spring comes, you really deserve it. So one day I decided I was going to sag off Apple, and I went over there at Clapton's house. The relief of not having to go see all those dopey accountants was wonderful. And I walked around the garden with one of Eric's acoustic guitars and wrote "Here Comes the Sun." End quote. What a great backstory, because it really sounds like, yeah, dude. This vocal still sounds fresh today. This doesn't sound tired. It doesn't sound dated to me. You can always make arguments, Phil, if you wanted to, about, well, the particular instruments they play. Who cares? This song still sounds fresh to me, dude. It sounds like it could have been written last week.
Yeah, I agree.
It's a classic, kids, and I agree with Phil. This is one of this is another great song, and yes, you can argue that this and George's other song are the best two songs on the album for sure. All right, track 2 on side 2 is Because. And this is not a different Phil, but this didn't happen, I don't think, too very often in the Beatles' career, or in their catalog, I should say. This song is credited to Lennon McCartney, and Harrison. It runs for 2 minutes and 45 seconds. Maybe a hot take. This song really, really sets still. And I think what saves this song is the harmonizing between these
Yeah.
three guys. Because, dude, Phil, without the harmonizing, I don't know if this song works. But, dude, by the way, have you heard this song without the music in the background?
I haven't.
Oh, you got to look that up. It's so good. It's chilling. It's chilling how good they sound together, which we don't think about enough either, is that the sound of the Beatles wasn't just John and Paul, it was the three of them together on vocals.
Yeah, when I think of three of them together on vocals, I always think of them performing "This Boy" for some reason.
Oh, yes. Good call. Good call back. 100%, man. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, this song doesn't really do much for me. It's kind of boring. But again, I think that the second half of the album works so much better on the whole. And I don't want to say the second half of the album saves the album, but I feel like it anchors it in a way. And in the sense that uh all of the songs fit a purpose on the second half of the album. Even if it's a song I don't really care for, um, I understand why it's there. Like I feel like "Here Comes the Sun" is a great way to start off the second half of the album. Again, if you want to get into the subtext of, hey, how the first half of the album started, come together, let's make this album. Um, then the second half of the album starts with a very bright and happy record that's almost like, hey, I enjoy being a part of this band. I kind of miss the camaraderie of being a part of this band. Um, and I think because it's kind of like this, I don't want to say palate cleanser, or like this I don't want to say a transition into the rest of the second half of the album, which all works as a kind of a extended melody.
Yeah, and I don't know if you know the song behind, or excuse me, the story behind this, but it's a good one. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information, and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. So the story goes that it was inspired by Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, but played
Hmm.
backwards. That Yoko was a classically trained pianist, which I didn't know that, to be honest with you.
I can
Uh,
believe that.
I mean, I know she could sit on a stool pretty well and scream like a banshee. That's talent. Look, hey, I'm not sour, Phil. Maybe a little, but I don't think she gets enough blame. I'm just saying. So
um, yeah, I just saw a clip of something with Yoko in it, and it's of her screaming so loud during a loud performance of something that the engineer cut her microphone off. um,
God.
yeah, uh, Yoko.
Yeah, that's a whole
But
other
again,
podcast.
if you want to read into uh, what this what this album meant for them as a swan song to the song, it wouldn't have been an album without a Yoko influence on it because of her influences on the group towards the end.
Very true. And I also remember back to John and Chuck Berry on stage on the Dick Cavett show, and Yoko's screaming in the background, and Chuck he has the big eyes, and he's almost laughing when he turns around to sing with John. And I'm like, God, dude, you gotta feel bad for Chuck. Chuck's like, man, what are we doing? What's going on? What are you doing, John? You know. Whew. Uh anyway, another story for another time. But yeah, John supposedly heard her playing it and said, could you play that backwards? And then he wrote because around the backwards Moonlight Sonata. He said the lyrics are clear, no BS, no imagery, no obscure references. Um, there you go. I don't know, and you know, part of the again, part of the story of this song is that the harmonies behind this song was supposedly perhaps inspired by the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, which makes complete sense because these two bands were in competition with each other. Um, you know, I mean, like they competed for a couple of albums. Brian writes, you know, Pet Sounds. The Beatles come back with Pepper, and yeah, we're in a flat out war here, kids. Maybe a friendly competition, maybe you could say. But what do you, dude? What do you think about that comparison? The three-part harmony of these guys, maybe versus the Beach Boys. Which, dude, talk about harmony, Phil. The Beach Boys. Oh my God, the harmony. Like, whew.
I mean, I feel like it's kind of hard to compete with the Beach Boys because that was kind of their trademark,
Mhm.
their harmonies. Um, I don't know. It's kind of tough to that's kind of tough to call. I kind of just want to say Beach Boys because, like I said, that was their trademark. That was their bread and butter.
Yeah.
But I think that the second half of the album, you definitely get an idea of just how great the harmonies are on. I mean, several songs in the second half of the album. I feel like the harmonies are really good. Uh, I kind of liken the second half of the album to like this kind of weird like Bollywood movie or like a big theatrical presentation of like them saying goodbye in
Mhm.
song. Almost like a big musical to me. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah. No, hey, dude, yeah. Because we're getting ready to hit the big, you know, I don't know what I'm gonna call this. The songs that link together. I'm sure that they've called it something over the years, but like this big, feels epic, feels like a story being told, feels like a movie soundtrack that we're beginning here.
Yeah,
Um,
it feels like a extended melody. It's like a cuz
yes.
yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. We start with track number 3, kids. You Never Give Me Your Money. 4 minutes and 3 seconds. Um, Linda McCartney jam, Paul and lead vocals on this. I really love this song. I can sing along to this song all day. I really enjoy singing along with this song all day. And it's so good, dude. I love the lyrics. I love the music. I love Paul's bass. I love the breakdown of it. Out of college, money spent, see no future, pay no rent. Are you kidding? And Paul does that thing with his voice where he's being a little playful and kind of like a character. And dude, Phil, a lot of the stuff that Paul would try like this doesn't really work too well, really. It works so good here, I think. What do you think about You Never Give Me Your Money?
This is definitely a Paul record. It has all of the
Mhm.
as all the hallmarks of Paul's, both his style with the Beatles, but stuff that he was known for later in his solo career, other collaborations he's done. Um, has a very beautiful piano and his vocals at the beginning, and then it breaks down into like his kind of kooky piano playing, and like you said, his like playful singing that he likes to do, and it all works tremendously here. I think that the breakdown in the melody later in the record is really good. Um, his piano playing throughout the record is good. His bass
Mhm.
playing is great. It's just a great record.
Yeah, yeah, it really was. Some backstory, some context about this. Paul really began to rise to power in the politics of the band after Brian
You can
Epstein
see it.
passed in '67. Dude, that was the impetus for Paul kind of going full demagogue here, wasn't it?
Yeah.
No one to really keep them in check. The group's dynamic was began to unravel. He was unhappy with the others who wanted Alan Klein to help resolve financial matters. Paul later said that the song was written with Klein in mind, saying, quote, "It's basically a song about no faith in the person." He added that One Sweet Dream, Pack Up the Bags, Get in the Limousine was based on his trips to the country with Linda to get away from the tense atmosphere with the Beatles. Paul's trying to get away from the tense atmosphere with the Beatles, Phil. That's different, huh?
Well, I think he understood at this point that he had his idea creatively about what he wanted to do,
Hmm.
and the others didn't agree. And I feel like the more they butted heads, I think he just felt like there are ideas that I want to do creatively. And for as bad of a rap as he got for being a control freak, um, I hate to say it, but the second half of this album proves that he was right. Because I feel like the creative direction behind the second half of the album, it is there's a more concise project on the second half of this album.
Hmm.
You can even go into everything that he did after his solo album and look at like stuff he did with Wings. And when it was his creative direction, he made some fantastic music.
He
Um,
really did.
I'm not a big fan of all of his solo stuff, but you could argue he had a more prolific solo career than any of the other members because he had such a clear direction on what he wanted to do. It feels like his biggest flaw towards the end of the group was his biggest strength in a lot of ways. But I just think that that's because all four of them had outgrown being a part of this group, and I think it hurts to say that as fans of the group. It hurts to say that and see that it damaged their friendship. But I feel that that was just what it is. They just outgrew being a part of this group.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this really begins the medley, right? Because You Never Give Me Your Money leads to Sun King, leads to Mean Mr. Mustard,
Yes.
leads to Polythene Pam, leads all the way through to the end, right? There's none of these songs are broken up that I can recall.
Yeah, and all of these songs, they do kind of the same. They kind of have the same pattern as you would hear in like a overture
Hmm.
in like an opera or uh like a play, and that's why I kind of tie it to a musical because it has like those same kind of callbacks to music earlier in the album. Like Sun King has its callbacks to Here Comes the Sun,
Hmm.
um, and some of the later records has its callback to this record and You Never Gave Me Money. Um, that's what I'm saying. You could see the direction. I mean, yeah, here's another callback for you. You can see the direction and how the end of this half of the album kind of has its it kind of has a narrative to it, which is very close to Band on the Run.
Mm. Oh, good call. Yeah, good call. Um, so You Never Give Me Your Money leads to Sun King. Again, Phil, instrumentation is key here. The bass is key here. Paul is on his game here. This is absolutely, as we said, this is Paul's kind of style here. This is, ah, man, I really love Sun King, dude. I've always been a big fan of this song. The three of them sound so freaking good together. Lennon, McCartney, and Harrison getting credit on this again. Sun King runs for 2 minutes 26 seconds. One of the shortest songs on the album, and we'll go ahead and call it for what it is. Sun King leads uh, to Me, Mr. Mustard, and actually Sun King kind of stops, and then Me and Mr. Mustard leads very abruptly with a drum beat, Ringo's drum beat, and then Mustard leads to Polythene Pam. Polythene Pam leads to Bathroom Window, which leads to Golden Slumbers, which leads to Carry That Weight, which leads to the end. Whew, that's a lot of tracks to cover, Phil. Uh, we'll start at the top. What do you think about Sun King? What do you think about this song?
Sun King starts with this absolutely incredible instrumentation. It's, it's it's just so striking every time you listen to it. It's very tempting to not judge any of the last 6 or 7 records on this album on their own because in some ways they don't work very well on their own.
Hmm.
I feel like the second half of the album is better because of the sum of its parts. Like if you just take a song, like I mean, you can take some of these songs by themselves, but they're so short and they kind of feel like unfinished ideas. Um, but I feel like they all work together to kind of fit this like very weird narrative. As like I said, to send off to the group. But um, I feel like Sun King is probably one of the most complete ideas in the second
Oof.
half.
Yeah. Fun bass line to play too, kids, by the way, just saying. And it was apparently George Martin and Paul's idea to link these songs together as sort of the farewell. So yeah, I would submit they probably knew this was it. In fact, I'm sure they knew this was it. Sun King was originally called Here Comes the Sun King, was changed, of course, for obvious reasons because of Here Comes the Sun. Um, and by the way, the Romance languages that occurs, uh, was it Cuando para mucho? We just made it up, says John. Paul knew a few Spanish words from school, so we all just strung any Spanish words that sounded vaguely like something. And of course, we got a chickafurdy in. That's a Liverpool expression. Doesn't mean anything to me, but a childish taunting, like nah, 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 nah. In an interview in '87, George said the recording was inspired by Fleetwood Mac's Albatross. At the time, Albatross was out with all the reverb on guitar, so we said, let's be Fleetwood Mac doing Albatross, just get it going. It never really sounded like Fleetwood Mac, but that was the point of origin. Imagine being Fleetwood Mac. You're already a classic band by yourself, but you find out the Beatles are like, dude. I mean, again, Fleetwood Mac's had an amazing career. Let's don't sell them short, but yikes! Just knowing that the Beatles were inspired to do something that you did. Whew.
Yeah, I mean, the one of the things that I think is amazing about the Beatles is that they were definitely students of so many different styles of music, and you can see a lot of influences and inspiration throughout this album.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you can definitely tell uh, the influences in this record. Um, it does have like kind of like that flamenco reverb vibe, and it also still has like their like psychedelic rock
Mm-hmm.
roots in there as well. Um, but yeah, I really like Sun King. I think that it's one of the more complete records, even though it's not really a complete song, but it feels
Mm-hmm.
like a complete record. Um, and it just fits. It just fits as a next record after You Never Gave Me Money. I don't know why this melody works, but it does. It's one of those things that it if you really think about it too hard, it's like no, none of these ideas really work together, but they kind of do. I don't know.
They do, and we never really mentioned, Phil, that a lot of these songs were written while they were in Rishikesh, India. It's
Yeah,
worth noting. They had a
which
real God, dude. They had such creative surge in that country. It's insane how much material they wrote just while in Rishikesh.
yeah,
Um, So this leads Sun King leads directly to Mean Mr. Mustard. And I'm gonna tell you this. I don't want to hear any hate out there for Mean Mr. Mustard. I love this freaking song. It's just odd enough. And from the title of it, you would think maybe it's a Paul song, but it's a John song, right? But I love this song. This song was written again while they were in Rishikesh. John said it was inspired by a newspaper story about a miser who concealed his cash wherever he could in order to prevent people from forcing him to spend it. On reflection, he didn't think highly of the composition, dismissing it in the anthology as a bit of crap he wrote in India. That's a bit of crap I wrote in India. That's good. That's such good stuff. Dude, I love this song. I don't care what anybody says, man. What do you think about this song?
If it fits my analogy that the melody really feels like a big grand kind of like musical or Bollywood film.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it follows this narrative pattern of Sun King has all the influences of their time in India and like the that time in their career. And Mean Mr. Mustard, in a lot of ways, reminds me of what they were doing on Sergeant Pepper. It has a lot of those same kind of sounds to it. Um, it's very percussion heavy. It has a tambourine in the background that's very prevalent. Um, I like it. It's one of those that if it went on for too long, I probably would get tired of it. But it works so well as a short record.
Yeah, you're right. It does work well as a short record. And you said it was fairly short. It's a minute and 6 seconds. It is the shortest song on the album. So there you go. Interesting tidbit about this song also from Mr. Mustard is that in the original version of this song, that his sister's name was Shirley. That Mr. Mustard's sister's name was Shirley, but John changed it to Pam so they could link it to the next song on the album, which is Polythene Pam. Polythene Pam is a very bizarre song, children. A minute 13 seconds. And again, Phil, I can't say I skipped this song too often much because I really actually like this song. These two songs connect for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which they're very short, quick hits in and out. Polythene Pam connects. What do you think about Polythene Pam? This is another George on the lead vocal, by the way, everybody.
Um, yeah, I every time I always think of him playing it during the footage from Get Back Now,
Mm-hmm.
because that's like I don't know. It's like every time I think about it, that's what I think about. And to follow their narrative of like this is like the story structure they're trying to do and do all of these nods to their career. Polythene Pam kind of makes me think of like them as a touring band, and just like this kind of loose story of somebody they saw in a crowd.
Yeah. Um, yeah, dude. Yeah. It's so funny, man, because like in any other album, any given time, this could be a skip for some people. Dude, maybe it is a skip for some people, but I just think it fits. Dude, do you
I
think
enjoy
part of
it.
the reason why this stuff fits so well is because we've heard it for so many years?
I think that we've just grown accustomed to hearing it in the sequence that it's in. That it's like, yeah, yeah. I mean, because again, this is not a complete idea for a record either. This is just like an idea for a record that they just threw on here. Um, but I think it works. Like I said, narratively, it just. I think if you just listen to those songs, the last 6 or 7 songs together, um, and it could be just the nostalgia of knowing that this is it for this band. I think you get all of these visuals about what they meant as a band together, and all of these like drastically different parts of their career and how they somehow mesh together.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right. Everything coming together in the end for which will undoubtedly be the end for this band. Unfortunately for us, right? Pam connects to track 7. She came in through the bathroom window. This is Paul and lead vocal, a minute 58 seconds. I feel another quick hit here. Um, Not quite as short as the other two, obviously. I love She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. There's something about it. The rhythm is really nice. It hits all the familiar chords for me. It does everything it should do. The mystery, or not mystery, but the story behind this song It was inspired by one of the fans who hung around outside Paul's home had broken in.
Oh God.
Yeah, like, and it makes sense now that you go back and listen to it. It says, we were bored. He was out, and so we decided to pay him a visit. We found a ladder in his garden and stuck it up at the bathroom window, which he had left slightly open. I was the one who climbed up and got in. She then opened the front door to let the others inside. In addition to close, the fans also stole a number of photographs. Yikes. Let's see. Yeah, isn't that crazy? Like,
Yeah. I mean, it is. But of course, that throws me off because a home invasion could end really badly for someone,
yeah,
and it ended very badly for George,
it did.
obviously. Um, I never knew that story. But I do like this record a lot. I do. I think if I am drawing the comparisons to anything else they've done, and kind of the thing that I visualize in this melody is uh it kind of feels similar to some of the stuff off of White Album. It has kind of that same
Mm,
tone at the beginning of the song. Uh, kind of, I don't know. It kind of reminds me of like Day in a Life in some ways at the beginning, but I really like Paul's vocal performance on here. It's something about him, the way he's singing the refrain on it that I really enjoy. Um, I don't know. I think towards the end of this album, I feel like Ringo does a lot of great things on drum as well. Because I feel
mm.
like on Me, Mr. Mustard, and the way he plays on Polythene Pam as well, I think that if you're one of those that will yell that Ringo didn't carry his weight, he definitely carried his weight on the second half of this album.
Oh, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And this is another Cocker cover, by the way, Phil. Joe covered this. Our friend Joe covered this. And it actually works quite a bit. Works very well, actually. Bathroom window. We'll get it. Bathroom window, kids. And we're ripping right along here in case you weren't following along. Track number 8, Golden Slumbers. This is 1 minute 31 seconds, actually shorter than Bathroom Window. Phil, maybe I'm overstating this, but Golden Slumbers and Carry That Weight feel so incredibly big to me. They feel so incredibly big. Like, I don't know how else I can put it. It just feels like Golden Slumbers especially just has this gravitas to it in my head for some reason. It feels like a very big song. Like the instrumentation, Paul's voice, the way he hits those notes, them together playing, man. Whew, it's such a good track, dude. What do you think about Golden Slumbers?
Again, I feel like Paul was right.
Mm,
I hate to put it that way, but Paul's right about a lot of his creative choices. And maybe we just have it that way in retrospect, and maybe that's possibly because we don't know what the other members wanted to do. But I feel like he had such a clear vision of what he wanted to do. Um, this song is incredible. I think that is one of the most beautiful records on the album. I think it starts with the piano that is very similar to what he trademarked with like Hey Jude. Um, and just the somber way he starts the record, and it almost sounds like a lullaby. And then when he like starts singing louder towards the middle of the song, and he has like those like soaring lead vocals, it's so good. Um, and the way that it carries right into the next record and it blends perfectly. You could just see the vision he had for this album sonically. And when he gets in his production bag with whoever he's working with, George Martin or whoever. And I agree, it just has like this huge scope to it. It has this huge orchestral scope to it that you would find in like musicals and like big like stadium shows.
mm. Yeah, yeah. See, yeah, it's so big. It's so big. This is based on the poem "Cradle Song" from the play "Patient Grisel," a lullaby by the dramatist Thomas Dekker. Paul saw sheet music for Cradle Song in his father's home in Liverpool, left on the piano by his stepsister Ruth. Never knew he had a stepsister, by the way. Unable to read music, he created his own music. Paul uses the first stanza of the original poem with minor word changes, adding it to a single lyric line repeated with minor variation. In the 1885 collection, St. Nicholas Songs, page 177, is W.J. Henderson's music set to the poem titled Golden Slumbers Kiss Your Eyes. Abbey Road does not credit Decker with the stanza or with the title.
Hmm.
Try doing that in this day and age, kids. You'll be in court
Yeah.
for a good long while. Yeah, so good. He said he begins the song soft tone appropriate for a lullaby for sure, and then it comes in very strong toward the end. Um, God, such a good song, dude. I really love this song a lot. And this song leads to another song, Phil, which to me again feels very, very big, is Carry That Weight. And they all four have credit on this song, which I don't know how many times that's happened in their careers. 1 minute, 36 seconds for Carry That Weight. Dude, there again, another massive song. Like, what do you think about Carry That Weight?
Yeah, it just had this big, huge production vibe to it. It definitely feels like kind of like the reprise section in musicals. I'm not a musical fan, by the way. I don't like musicals, but I've seen enough musicals that most musicals have like a reprise at some point
Mhm.
towards the tail end of the musical, and it kind of reprises a song that was earlier in the song in the movie or the musical, and uh, this song starts really well. It had the great drums from Golden Slumber that leads into this record, and then you kind of have what almost feels like them doing like this ensemble cast all singing in unison, and then right afterwards it does like that kind of reprise of the same melody from uh you never give me your money.
Good call. Dude, you can hear Ringo in this quite a bit, dude.
Yeah.
I love this song so much. I love it, Phil, because they're singing together. I'm still that sentimental fan that wants to remember them as being friends and loving each other and not suing each other till they till the wheels fell off. Uh oh, listening to them sing it, man, so good, so good. Uh there's a few different versions of depending on whose version you want to believe here. There have been music critics over the years that kind of pointed out. One guy in particular points out his belief that this song was proof that nothing they would do as individual artists would equal what they had achieved together, and they would always carry the weight of their past as Beatles. Paul said that the song was about their business problems and how bad the atmosphere was at Apple, how heavy it was. And then, yeah, oh, I got one more. And then Imagine the film, John says that Paul was singing about all of us. So, like, I guess it depends on whose version you believe, dude. Um, I don't know if
um
it matters. It's so good here. Love this song.
but again, it just feels like all of them came together for like this ensemble this
Mhm.
ensemble finishing chorus of this musical before they all went their separate ways. And of course, each of them's interpretation of what the song was actually about wasn't really important in the moment. This is just a great moment for us to finish this up and wrap up
Yeah.
our time together. But then, of course, later, all the infighting came into it. Like, yeah, I didn't like any of that at all. Like, by the way, I felt like you were talking about me.
And dude, it's basically the same bass line as Sun King.
Yeah.
It really is. It's basically the same bass line. I love how they melded the sounds together, dude. It's so good. Um, Carry That Weight ends to the end. Not literally the end, but pretty darn close. Um, Again, this is another quick hit, Phil. This is not a very long song, but there's two things to say about the end, which runs for 2 minutes, 5 seconds. Pause on lead vocal, Linda McCartney track, of course. Two things to say about this song, Phil. One, it's really, really, really good. Two, give Ringo Starr his flowers. Deck out that drum kit. Give the man what he's earned. This is so good. His timing's impeccable. He knows what he's doing behind the drum kit. People need to back off. Guy's a Hall of Fame drummer. That's at the end of that conversation. This
Yeah.
song is so good, dude. And it doesn't need to be longer, doesn't need to be shorter. I think it's perfect. What do you think about the end?
Yeah. Yeah, Ringo is great on drums on this. I mean, just the beginning of the record with the do 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 do
Oh,
do do. So great. And just sonically it sounds a lot like Saffroy Truffle to me. Every time when I hear
mm,
about it, like that's the callback of like that's the visual I think of what they're trying to call back of their part of their career. It reminds me of Saffroy Truffle.
good call. And that bass line. Boom, 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 boom. Oh, so good. I'll always find the bass in a song, dude. It's so freaking good. And the guitar lick is perfect.
Yeah, guitar lick is great. The solo that's in there is great.
And to be fair, it sounds like three guitars back and forth. And I don't know that it is. It sounds like Paul, John, and George battling it out on guitar. It really does. Or
Yeah.
maybe at least John and George doing it.
Um Subtext there, if we want to get into that. I think the sound of this record has these like competing guitars, but they still work together well. I feel like there's like these differing guitar riffs in there that all work well together, but you can tell like there's like so many kind of sounds competing for your attention, which is kind of the subtext of the group towards the end.
Mhm.
Um, but then it ends with like one of the most well-known Beatles lyrics ever. Um, it, the I mean, the in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And it's just such a perfect way to end the album. It's a perfect way to end their time as a group together. Um, in a lot of ways, like uh, it's kind of like them all writing their signature on the screen at the end.
Mm. Like at the end of the Avengers film,
Yeah,
right? Oh, it's
yeah,
so good. Yeah. Oh man, that makes me think about it in a much different way. Uh this is a good little tidbit. Again, referencing the 1980 Playboy interview with John, which by the way, this thing must be must read material, Phil. We're going to go look this up. John acknowledged Paul's authorship by saying, "That's Paul again. He had a line in it." And in the end, of course, as you said, the love you take is equal to the love you make. He said, which is a very cosmic philosophical line, which again proves that if he wants to, he can think.
wow,
Even when he's salty, it's entertaining. I can't help it. Um, yeah. So let's see. It was recorded via overdubs of 2 minutes and 5 seconds. At this point, the song was called Ending. The first vocals for the song were added on August 5th. Additional guitars and vocals overdubs were added on August 7th. Bass and drums August 8th, the day the Abbey Road cover picture was taken. Orchestral overdubs were added August 15th, and the closing piano and accompanying vocal on August 18th. So this song was recorded in a series of steps. Yeah. Said Ringo supposedly dislikes drum solos, preferring to cater the drum work to whoever sang in a particular performance. Good for him. His solo in the end was recorded with 12 microphones around his drum kit. In his playing, he said he copied part of Ron Bushy's drumming on the Iron Butterfly track and Agata Davida. Oh, great song. The take in which Starr performed the solo originally had guitar and tambourine accompaniment, but other instruments were muted during mixing, giving the effect of a drum solo.
yeah.
Interesting.
It has a real Who sound to it as well. Like
Ooh, good
has
call.
that
Yeah.
same kind of like drum pattern of like We Won't Be Fooled Again,
Yeah, good call. Yeah.
which I don't know which predates the other. So I can't. I'm not saying, of course, that Ringo copied that sound, but it has that same similar sound to it.
Yeah, you know what? You're totally right about that. Yeah, it's Keith Moon at his finest.
Yeah,
You know what? The timing may be about right because this is 69. It's probably close. It's probably close.
might be close. Of course, again, I'm not saying that Ringo copied anybody, but it does have that same kind of cadence to it, the same kind of timing to it.
Ooh,
Um,
won't get fooled again. Came out in 71. So who
maybe,
copied who here, Phil?
maybe. I mean, Keith Moon is incredible.
He is.
Great drummer. Um,
Yeah.
but I mean, yeah, just the way the song ends with the fade off it has, and like the extended again, everybody ensemble singing the high note in unison, like a musical, has the
Mm-hmm.
same kind of
Mm-hmm.
vibe to it of everybody singing in unison as the curtains close.
I'm with you, by the way. I hate musicals as well. Can't stand them. I don't get it. I'm sorry. I know they're the thing. I just don't get it. I don't
Yeah,
understand the allure of
yeah,
it.
I'm not a fan of musicals at all. But I've seen enough of them. We've all watched Disney movies growing up, and
Mm-hmm.
it all, everybody has to sing. Uh, And so I'm used to all of the cues and tropes from a musical. And the second half of this album has a lot of the tropes and hallmarks of a musical.
Well, that could have been it, ladies and gentlemen. That could have been the last shot that we ever heard from these four on the same record at the same time, recorded. That could have been it. And it would have been an amazing outro, an amazing, final chapter of a career that will never be duplicated, ladies and gentlemen. Think about that. You can name other bands who have done great things. You can name other singers who have done great things. But as a body of work to be as influential and like the staying power, I would argue no one tops this band. This could have been it. But in true Beatles style, Phil, they said, nah, that's not quite it. I would like to think that one of them said, let's just be cheeky and let's end this on a fun note. And they totally did with Her Majesty. How great is it? They ended their run, their iconic run with Her Majesty. What do you think about that?
It definitely feels like if we're doing our Avengers analogy, um, it feels like cutting back at the mid credit sequence uh, in Iron Man 3, and everybody thinks, "Oh, this is the tease for what's next. What are they going to do next as a band?" And nope, it's just a joke about nothing. Sorry,
Yes.
it's a it's a it's a joke about Tony being in therapy all this time, and Bruce is not listening to him.
Yes. Absolutely. Oh, I love it so much. So the story behind this, the song was originally put between Mr. Mustard and Polythene Pam, but Paul decided the sequence did not work, and it was cut out of the album's closing medley by Abbey Road's tape operator John Kurlander. He was instructed by Paul to destroy the tape, but in my yes, but in my policy stated
Not
that no
destroy
Beatles.
it.
Yes, in my policy
Oh,
stated
Paul.
that no Beatles recording was to ever be destroyed. The 14 seconds of silence between the end of Her Majesty are the result of Kurlander's lead out tape added to separate the song from the rest of the recording. So let me get this straight, Phil. We have this engineer from EMI to thank for this outro. That is the craziest thing I've ever heard, dude.
Yeah. Um. Again, there's all the subtext of how John wanted something, and it wouldn't have fit in that melody at all. It
Mm-mm.
wouldn't have worked in the sequence that he wanted it to go in. There was the right call to take it out, but of course, Paul just being like, just destroy it. It's hilarious.
We don't need it. Get rid of it. Oh my
Destroy it.
God.
Burn the footage.
Burn it. Burn the
um,
masters.
yeah, that in itself is hilarious. And it
Ooh.
still managed to find its way on the album because, of course, uh, yeah, like I said, if you really read into all the subtext here and you look at all the signs, this was definitely the end.
Now, let's don't get this too very twisted, kids. We could, credit this gentleman for saving this the way this album ends, but to be fair, he did cut it at the end, but supposedly the next day when Paul heard it, he liked it, said it was perfect, and they left it. Because you got to believe, Phil, if Paul really wanted it gone, it'd have been gone once he heard it. Um, it is the shortest song in the Beatles catalog at 26 seconds. Um, I think it's perfect. I think it's one of those little odd random tidbits of these guys' careers together as a foursome that it's absolutely freaking perfect. It's spot on. It works in every way possible. And again, I think it's basically commentary for what these four guys did together, how they were just like, dude, we spent almost 2 hours gushing over the genius of this band, but in their minds, they were never anything but a rock and roll band. I mean, Paul said it for years. He said we were just a rock and roll band. This was the same guy who didn't want to sing Yesterday. They only recorded it because they had it. And he didn't want to get out in front of the band because he said, we're a rock and roll band. We can't do this. Even he said they shouldn't do it, but they did it anyway. Like, the irony, Phil, here is that while some bands set out to be Hall of Fame guys, these guys never really did that. They just really wanted to play. Like, I love that there's always, despite how big they got, and I know Paul got huge. I mean, especially could consider, some people say his head and his ego, but for a long time, they were humble and they just wanted to make music. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree. Um, it is crazy to think about how far they came from just being a small group from Liverpool, and then just kind of grew into this like global phenomenon that was it kind of grew out of their control. And I think that was another reason why it was kind of time for them to go separate ways, because the group had just gotten too big. Um,
Mm.
it had to serve too many masters, and creatively they wanted to do vastly different things as individuals. And then you, of course, had to meet the expectations of the hype of what they've built. I just think that there was no way that they could constantly keep getting in the studio and, I don't know, meeting those kind of expectations both for themselves and what fans wanted.
Yeah, yeah, because at some point you had to either keep delivering or you're going to fail. Like, yeah, dude, the pressure must have been insane. And not only that, dude, the pressure they put on themselves. I wonder if the pressure they put on themselves could measure the pressure that everybody else put on them. I don't know the answer to that. But dude, feel like the world expected these guys to be perfect, and when they weren't, they called them out on it. Happened all the time. So,
Yeah.
um, well, kids, there you have it. There is the final actual studio recording of the four lads from Liverpool together. This is not the final release, but the final recording, as we stated at the top of this episode. That's Abbey Road. Um, so, Phil, before I get your last word, we started the show off where I asked you how you ranked this album. Like, um, in terms of where you believe this should be ranked. I mean, there's a lot of classics on here, and there's some oddball choices at times. But where do you think this? How do you think this album should be remembered by, in the annals of rock history? How do you think this should be remembered?
I think it's going to be remembered as one of their best albums because I think conceptually it's a great album as a whole. Um, I think it has maybe two or three of the best Beatles songs ever on it. And so I think you gotta give it its credit in that vein alone. But I think it's similar to Sergeant Pepper in the sense that it's just conceptually it's a great album. Um, Now, of course, I don't know how much of that is intentional, um, but the second half of this album really it's so good as a concept and as a narrative. I feel like the melody that they do at the end of it is one of the best things they've done as a I don't know as a project. I mean, I don't know if it feels as big if you just go and you pick out a single song from those last 7 songs, but just as a melody, it's amazing.
God, it really is. It really is. I could listen to that melody all day. They just fit so perfectly together. At least they feel like they do. Um, well, folks, that'll not be the last time we talk about the Beatles. We've not covered every album. Maybe that'll be a goal here on the 6M to cover every album. There's a lot more to go. Trust me, we got a lot more to go. But that's what we have at the moment. So, Phil, let's put a button on this, my friend. Let's take this home and give me your last word on Abbey Road?
Uh, Abbey Road is in some ways bittersweet as the last real project they worked on, and the stories behind it and the tension behind it are just as much bittersweet. But I think that they at least managed to come together and make a really good album on their way out. It would be easy to say that there are sequencing issues here, and you could tell that the creative differences are on full display. But I still think it came together as a great project.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Man, what an amazing album. By again, four legends. I'll call them four legends because I believe they are. Um, well, kids, there you have it. There's Abbey Road. Again, we've got a lot more to go in regards to this band. A lot more albums to talk about. I could talk about this band all day. Could have made a Beatles specific podcast. There's not 1,000 of those out there, right, everybody? But because apart from that, on the 6M, we covered just about everything. So that's what we'll continue to do here. Legends that will never die. They'll always live on. You'll always have this album to enjoy or critique, as we know some people love to do. But for guys like us who appreciate everything the Beatles brought to the table, we respect this album and recognize it as the classic it is. A lot more to come, kids, so hold on for that. But in the meantime, that is Abbey Road. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at 6M Podcast. We'll see you next time.